Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's start of a five-part series on World War II. Today's lesson is titled Steps to War, and we'll actually be getting into some of the early conflicts in the Second World War toward the end of this lesson. But let's start by talking about the rise of dictatorships. By the mid-1930s, several nations around the world had been taken over by dictators. These are absolute rulers who really did not answer to anybody. Now, these nations largely believed that they were being treated unfairly by others, that their nation was great, but these other nations kept abusing them or not treating them fairly. And they convinced the people of those nations to support them, these individuals who promise to solve all of their problems. These individuals who say, I alone have the answers that will lead us to have a better nation. These dictators then were able to seize control of that population and of the nation. Let's look at our first one first. In the 1930s, Italy was just forming the modern nation state of Italy as we know it. Before that, Italy was a collection of smaller principalities and republics. But by the 1930s, Italy had come to form what we now think of as Italy. And it's important to know that Italy is populated by these descendants of the Roman Empire. These individuals whose ancestors had once been the most powerful empire on earth and controlled most of Europe, most of North Africa, and huge chunks of the Middle East. And believing that they come from this superior racial mix, the Italians believed that they were one of the supreme races. And under this fascist mentality, this is the belief that your nation has a right to rule because of the greatness of its people. This is a fascist idea. They really coalesce around Benito Mussolini, this man right here, who titled himself Il Duce, which basically means the leader. They became this fascist nation that hoped to reconquer the Mediterranean Sea. They wanted to conquer North Africa and Greece and really become the power in the Mediterranean. Now, just a little north of Italy, we have Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler rose to power partially because of the harsh conditions following World War I. The Treaty of Versailles in the end of World War I was very, very harsh to the Germans. Germans were blamed for World War I, and they were punished, largely unfairly. And Germans, seeing this as an abuse, they wanted their revenge. They wanted to get back. And furthermore, they only believed that they had lost World War I, not because of their own weakness, but because they had relied too much on Austria-Hungary and the Ottoman Empire and Italy at the time, which were weak allies. They were not strong enough. So Germany should have been stronger from the start. And so with this mentality in mind, Der Führer, this is Adolf Hitler's title, which basically means the leader, he sought strong friends that shared his view. Now, an early hero of Adolf Hitler is Benito Mussolini. He looked at how Mussolini had taken control of Italy, how Mussolini had mobilized his people, and how he inspired them to think of themselves as a great people. And Adolf Hitler said, I want to do this too, all the way down to choosing basically the same title, the leader. And so the Rome-Berlin axis is formed. In the Rome-Berlin axis, these two nations will work as partners to conquer areas of the world. In 1936, Italy invades North Africa. This is what got Hitler thinking along these lines, and they got together and formed this axis of power. And then in 1936, a little bit later on, they saw an opportunity to work together. And they supported a rising fascist government in the Spanish Civil War. And with the support of the Rome-Berlin axis, the fascist parties in the Spanish Civil War are able to win, although they will not formally join the Axis. Another dictator in Europe that I want to talk about is Joseph Stalin. Now, Joseph Stalin is not going to be a friend or ally of Hitler and Mussolini. He's got a very different approach to government, a very different mindset of how things should work. But he is a dictator. He seizes control of the Soviet Union following the death of Vladimir Ilyich Lenin, the man who founded the Soviet Union. And in the chaos after Lenin's death, Stalin is the one who rises up to control that nation, largely through arresting and executing most of his political opponents. Now, under Stalin, the Soviet Union transforms from an oligarchy, that is a rule by few, that is the top level of the Communist Party, kind of all ruled this country, into a dictatorship. And in a dictatorship, Stalin really becomes the leader of that nation. He is the man in charge. Now, away from Europe, over in the other side of Asia, we have Japan and General Tojo. Now, after industrializing, Japan really wants to be looked at as an equal. They want Europeans, the great military and imperial powers of the world, to see that Japan has arrived, that they are strong, that they are equal. But Europeans were racist. That's just what it is. They are racist. They see the Japanese as an inferior nation and an inferior race, and they completely ignore all the evidence to the contrary. And by 1930, the Japanese are just done. They don't need to convince anybody. They're going to go out and take over the world regardless of what others think they're capable of. And under the military leadership of General Tojo, Japan is able to demonstrate this by going out and conquering large areas of Asia. And we'll come back to that in a couple of lessons. Now, the last thing that really does help to lead to World War II is that the Allies were weak. The Allies were really just, they didn't want to fight a war. They weren't willing to provoke a war. They'd just gone through World War I, the war to end all wars. They didn't want to fight again. And Germany recognized this and took advantage of it. They began in 1936, where they reoccupied the Rhineland. The Rhineland was an area that had always been a part of Germany. The people who lived there spoke German. But at the end of World War I, France, wanting to punish Germany, had taken it away from them and simply claimed, no, this is now a part of France. Well, 1936, the Germans say, no, we're going to take it back. And they simply march in and take it. And the French don't put up too much of a fight here. They don't want war with Germany. And they're kind of recognizing that they had been a little too harsh to Germany at the end of World War I. And all these people speak German. They're culturally German. They want to be a part of Germany anyway. Whatever. Let them have it back. There were certainly people who didn't feel that way, but that's kind of the historical gist of it. The Allies didn't really respond much to it. So the Germans think, well, if we can take the Rhineland back just because it's mostly Germans who live there, then let's look for other Germans. Austria is largely peopled with Germanic people. The Austrians and the Germans have very similar histories, very similar language. Austrians speak German. And they kind of saw this natural combination. So why continue to have two different countries? Why not just have Austria be a part of Germany? And so Austria is annexed and becomes a part of Germany. And the Allies don't respond. So the Germans next look to an area of land around the Czechoslovakia called the Sudetenland, area that was controlled by Czechoslovakia, but had mostly German-speaking Germans. Let's just make that a part of Germany. So they did. And again, the Allies didn't really respond, although Great Britain is starting to get a little nervous here. And they do say to Hitler, hey, so you've expanded a lot. You've got all of your Germans in Germany now. There's no more need to expand any further. Please stop. And Hitler says, okay, I promise I won't do it. 5 months later, he invades Czechoslovakia. These are Czechs and Slovaks, not Germans. But he invades anyway. For a better look at the map here to see how this all plays out, here is Germany at the end of World War I. Everything in blue, including this little area over there. The Rhineland was the first thing they took. kind of a part of Germany. Makes more sense for it to be a part of Germany than France. So they got Germany back. They got the Rhineland. Then the Austrians say, hey, we're kind of Germans. We want to be a part of this party. So they join Germany. And together they all look at the Sudetenland, mostly Germans living within Czechoslovakia. Let's just go ahead and take this. And then they've got their teeth all the way around Czechoslovakia. Let's just go ahead and take that bite. And they take Czechoslovakia. So Germany has gone from just the blue to all of these colors. They're getting big. But the war hasn't started yet. No shots have been fired. The Allies did not stop Germany from taking Czechoslovakia. Despite what Britain had said, they did not step in. So Hitler sees them as weak. And the British once again say, don't do anything more. Don't take anybody else. But Hitler's like, they've said that to me before. What are they going to do this time? So Hitler invades Poland to try to take over Poland as well. This time, he's a bit more nervous that something might happen. And indeed, the Allies will declare war on him. But he's more nervous now about having to fight a two-front war. This was part of why Germany had lost World War I. They had to fight the Russians on one side and the French and British on the other. To avoid that, prior to invading Poland, Hitler signed a non-aggression pact with Stalin. Went to Stalin and said, hey, look, you don't love me, I don't love you, but let's not fight each other. We can carve up Eastern Europe between us. Stalin says, hey, this isn't a terrible idea. Let's go ahead and do that. And so they sign an agreement, and the Soviet Union does not join the Allies. And it's through this agreement that Germany will push and conquer Eastern Poland. And the USSR will simultaneously push westward and take over Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and the eastern half of Poland. So both nations are taking advantage of this to push their borders together. So how do the Germans do it? They do it by inventing a new style of war called Blitzkrieg. This new tactic, called Blitzkrieg or lightning war, helps the Germans to quickly and easily defeat their enemies. Now, Poland was not especially strong, but Germany was able to take them out in less than a month by using this tactic, where you attack your enemy, you push right through them, and then you keep going in order to encircle your enemy. You cut your enemy off from their supplies. And once they can't be supplied anymore, you can crush them. That's a Blitzkrieg war. You just blow right past your enemy. They use this very successfully in Poland, and then they turn it on France. And France, which they had fought unsuccessfully to capture and defeat for 4 years in World War I, they're able to destroy the French in 2 months of fighting. After 2 months of fighting in France, the German army is able to capture Paris and knock France out of the war. The only power now standing against Germany is Great Britain, is the United Kingdom. And they're only able to survive because the United Kingdom is on an island. You can't send your land army. So you have to defeat them with your navy and with your air force. The Germans will send their air force over, the Luftwaffe. But the RAF, the Royal Air Force, is able to defeat the German Air Force. They win the Battle of Britain, an air battle for the skies over Britain. And Germany has to withdraw. Germany realizes then that they will never capture Great Britain. This they cannot win right now. Maybe in the future, but not now. A big reason why the British were able to do this was because of an invention called radar, where the British were able to see where the German planes were and how they were coming and respond accordingly. So Germany's got a problem. They haven't captured Britain, but they still need to expand. They need to get resources to feed this growing war machine. So they look for other places to attack. And where they wind up looking is at the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union, the very nation that they had signed a non-aggression pact, just lost a war of expansion. We saw how the Soviets were able to push and capture big parts of Eastern Europe. But when they try to get Finland up here, they have a major setback. And they lose what's called the Winter War against Finland. And after losing that war, they look weak. And Hitler thinks, why did I sign a non-aggression pact with these guys? Let's just go over and take over Russia as well. And so they break the non-aggression pact and they invade the Soviet Union. That invasion leads to a rapid expansion. I want to show you right now this map, which really should highlight how things got so bad in Europe. Everything that is blue is controlled by the Axis powers, Germany and Italy. They have moved throughout France. Switzerland stays out of the war. They're neutral, so Germany just never invades them. But they've got control of North Africa. They've got control of Southeast Europe. And now they're pushing all the way into the Soviet Union, capturing huge areas of Russia. They've also now swept into Finland and convinced Norway to join their cause. Great Britain is really getting isolated in this conflict. But despite this, the Soviet Union is a huge nation with tremendous resources. And Germany gets overconfident. They overextend themselves, and they will eventually be defeated by the Soviet Union. And we'll get more into that later. But first, we need to at least introduce how the United States gets involved in World War II. In 1940, Japan will join the Axis power. They join the Axis power in order to attack the Soviet Union and take over some of their territory in Asia, as well as take over the colonies of the British and the French throughout Southeast Asia. But in December of 1941, the Japanese realized that the United States will always be a threat. But if they strike first, they might be able to disable the U.S. And so they attack through a sneak attack the U.S. Navy at Pearl Harbor. They win a decisive victory at Pearl Harbor and sink a large number of U.S. ships at that battle. But that does bring the United States into the war, which will ultimately be bad for Japan. The U.S. declares war on Japan, and as soon as the U.S. declares war on Japan, Germany and Italy, Japan's allies, declare war on the United States. And the United States is now fully involved in World War II. We're going to get into a lot more of this with our next 4 lessons. But today I wanted to really focus on the steps to war and how things got started. I hope you learned something and have a good solid foundation for our future lessons. I'll see you next time. Farewell.